Hi, welcome back. In this chapter, we're going to look at the sixth move a4. The sixth move a4 in the knight of after moves e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, cd9, d4, knight f6, knight f3, a6, now a4. It's a very positional system. White shows his intentions in that he will not castle long anymore. He wants to castle short. Played positional. a4, potentially useful move, restricting the b7 pawn. And the main idea is that after e5, which is what you play, knight f3, white still has his bishop on c1 and bishop on f1, and he wants to develop the bishop directly to c4 and this bishop directly to g5. So as opposed to a bishop e3, e5, knight f3 system, or bishop e2, e5, knight f3 system, white wants to make first this useful move a4 and then later develop one of the two bishops to its ideal square in order to fight for the d5 square. So very sensible idea, but black is obviously fine as in all of the neither of. And again, e5 is a perfectly fine move, and so that is my recommendation. Against a4, I believe this is perhaps the best or one of the best systems against which you can play the Scheveningen setup with e6, because the most dangerous variations with white castling long are now far less attractive with the pawn already being on a4. And if white goes for the short castle plans, then these setups are perfectly fine. Likewise, perfect moment to go for the dragon as well. A very decent setup here against a4. In fact, many players played the dragon against a4 system as was their main weapons. I think Jan Nepomniachtchi, for example, played many times the dragon. Also possible is to start with knight c6 as well, after which Gatakamsky introduced an interesting pawn sacrifice with a5 against Veselin Topalov in their match almost a decade ago already. For the it was a match for qualification to the World Championship match that Topalov won, and then he later played against Vishan, as you may know. These options are all possible, but I recommend e5. Here, white has, well, he has options, but knight f3 is the main point of a4. We should look at alternatives. Knight d2 is very rare, and also not particularly good. We play bishop to e6. f4 is now not an issue. After knight b7, f5, we have bishop c4. We have the c4 square, and as you know, once white pushed the pawn to f5, the e4 pawn becomes quite weak. And after knight d2, bishop 6, g3, that is sensible. We will land in the g3 e5 system after knight c6. As you remember, against g3 e5, knight d2, I recommend bishop to e7. But essentially, the idea in both cases is that pushing a4 too early gives control over the b4 square, and the knight should immediately land there and sit very well on b4. So that's what I recommend. Knight c6, bishop g2, knight b4, castle, bishop e7. It's a direct transport to the 6 g3 chapter, and here black is going for d5 plans, either immediately on the next move or eventually later. Knight d2, very rare move. Knight b3 has been played really a lot, but it is it doesn't have much independent value. After bishop e6 or bishop e7, in fact, white usually goes for bishop e2 anyway, and then we'll transpose to bishop e2 systems if we want. But even in bishop e2, also if white plays a4 too early, he just gives this extra option of knight c6, knight b4 always. So yeah, knight b3 has no independent value. I do give the move bishop e6 in this chapter just to give you some options. Now bishop g5 is pointless because of knight b7, and we can recapture on f6 with the knight. And if white plays here bishop e2, yeah, the easiest is to go bishop e7, castle, and we are in the chapter of 6 bishop e2. But you can also play more principle with knight c6, and I give a few lines just to demonstrate. After bishop g5, now we play bishop e7, bishop f6, bishop f6, castle. It's comfortable position. After knight d5, we play rook c8, put pressure on the c file, and if white goes for c3, stopping bishop d5, d5 and knight b4 ideas. If white goes for c3, then we have actually an interesting choice between first improving our bishop with bishop g5, or even going for this interesting move knight e7. Excuse me. Knight e7, trading the d5 knight off, and after knight f6 gf, despite having this doubled f pawns, we have a fantastic control over the d5 square, and the double pawns are not an issue. They're not an issue in itself, and also sometimes they can double with f5. So mainly the issue for white is that his knight on b3 is pretty bad here. So that is for bishop g5, and then bishop e3. The most common move now, we can send a knight to b4, and after castle bishop e7, we can play for this d5 push after rook c8, short castle, and so on. So knight b3, basically a worse version of bishop 2, knight b3. Knight f3 is the one that actually has a point. And now bishop e7 is the one I recommend. Here with knight on f3, bishop e6, it is met by knight g5. I haven't mentioned it in the chapter, but that's obviously the idea. And there is also a move h6 trying to stop bishop g5, but I'm in general always a fan of more straightforward development, so bishop e7 is my recommendation. A little bit simpler also for us to play. And here white has two principled moves. He can either start with bishop g5 or with bishop c4. In both cases, these are the ideal squares to fight for the d5 square. Let's start with bishop c4. Again, a little bit similar to the bishop e3 on move 6, e5 knight f3 variation. If you studied that chapter already, you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, very similar type of position. Small differences, small nuances are there. I propose bishop e6 first. There are different ways of playing here. You can just play it by ear, as long as you don't fall into the trap that I always talk about. I mean, for example, I don't know, for example, bishop e3, let's say knight d7, for example, bishop e3, and for example, castle. Yeah, now this trap, as long as you don't fall for this trap where we lose material, you are fine. You can play it by ear. By now, we've seen a lot, but still, of course, I will give you different variations just to give you some different ways of playing in such positions and show you even more ideas that are possible. So after bishop e6, white usually chooses from one of the three options, either drops the bishop back to b3, bishop back to a2, or starts with queen e2, waiting for white to attack the bishop with queen c7 or queen c8, as we'll see, and only then decide where to drop the bishop back. Let's look at all the options one by one. Bishop a2 first. Here, there are many different ways, of course, of playing. I recommend now h6, stopping bishop g5, castle and knight c6 before short castle, a sophisticated idea. Again, I'll repeat myself. You don't have to play this, but I really want to show it. It's very interesting. Now we use this fact that the bishop is on a2, so knight b4 comes with a tempo on the bishop. And if you play knight to c6 in this particular structure with the bishop already on a2, then I think we should try to avoid bishop g5 takes f6. So that's why we started with the move h6 here. Queen e2, standard move, knight b4, bishop b3. Whenever white takes on e6, as we know, f takes e6 improves our pawn structure. So that's not a problem. Bishop b3 is white's move. Now castle, rook d1. And here, very strong idea, queen c8. We'll see it also in other positions. Queen is reinforcing the bishop, which is not the main idea. The main idea is that now we might want to take on b3, and after taking, place the queen on this e6 square. For example, after a5, rook d8, and next we want to take on b3, play queen e6, and push d5. Queen c8, a strong idea to know in this particular position. After bishop b3, we use the fact that bishop on b3 is vulnerable to a different knight move. We play knight b7, bishop e3. Again, no castle. Of course, no castle because of takes and knight g5. Bishop e3 is obviously strong because if white castles, we'll have knight c5, putting pressure on both the e4 pawn and the b3 bishop. Bishop e3 is the point. Now rook c8, castle and knight c5. We have seen a very similar position when talking about 6h3, I believe, e5, knight f3 position. Bishop c5, rook c5, knight e1. There we also tried this knight b3, knight b4, knight d5 maneuver. If you're watching the series in the in this order and have seen H3 chapter already, you've seen this. And here I recommend rook c8, knight d3, and queen a5. In that position, white had the pawn on a2, and he would have a3 here. So there I recommended queen b6 and a5 push. But here with the pawn already on a4, we can safely play queen a5 and control the b4 square. As long as we stop knight b4, we're doing great. And next we want to reroute the bishop via d8 to b6, obviously after castling first. That is for bishop b3. Yeah, again, logical concept after bishop a2, h6, knight c6, knight b4. After bishop b3, knight d7, knight c5. Of course, we only need h6 in case you play knight c6, because in case you play knight bd7, we don't worry about bishop taking on f6, because now we can take the knight and reinstall control over the d5 square. Queen e2 first is a principled move. Now I recommend queen c8 again. Just to give you even more different ideas and setups in the knight of. There are, of course, many normal possibilities, different possibilities. The most important thing, as I say again, not to blunder into bishop e6, knight g5. Queen c8 here is working very well. The main idea is that after bishop a2, when we play knight to b4, if you remember, the queen on c8 is pretty well placed. It can sometimes go towards e6 square and support the d5 push. We looked first at bishop b3. Now we play knight bd7. Now the bishop on b3 is a target to knight bd7, knight c5. There are three moves here: bishop e3, castle, and bishop g5. After bishop e3, we play knight c5. This is an important line. Bishop e6, we go f takes e6. And after knight g5, white is now threatening bishop takes c5. And it is a very strong move here, b6. We want to take on c5 with the b pawn after bishop c5, and now black is doing very well. The pawn structure is unusual, but it's actually fantastic for black. Besides the usual three pawns here that we are used to see, d5, e5, e6, where e6 pawn is controlling the d5 square, we have now also a pawn on c5, which is close to the center. The b file is open for the rook. Everything's great. Only thing we should be aware of is the move queen c4. White is hitting the e6 pawn, but now there is a tactical solution. After d5, at the end of the line, the knight is hanging. After ed, knight, d5, knight d5, queen d5, the knight on g5 is hanging. Very nice tactic by us. And here white is actually fortunate. After queen d5, bishop e7, he has two pawns for the piece, and he has actually enough compensation to maintain the balance. After long castle, we can play, for example, king f7, which is very safe. We threaten bishop f6, and white has nothing better than move repetition with queen d5. Queen e6, queen f3, queen f6 check, and yeah, queen f5, queen e6 was just a repetition. And that is for bishop e3. And after castle, we just play knight c5. Yeah, this is not a real option for white. We are just very fine. After bishop e6, always take with the pawn and control this d5 square. Excellent position. Bishop g5 is the most principled. Now after knight c5, white will play bishop to a2, and after that he will threaten to gain control over the d5 square. Here we play bishop d8. A strong idea played by Vincent Keimer against Michael Adams in Build 2020. Vincent Keimer, talented German youngster, as I mentioned already in one of the previous chapters, works with Peter Liko, both of them good experts on the Najdorf. And also, while I'm not sure how deeply he was prepared, very likely that this was not an improvisation. Very strong setup. Yeah, bishop d8, nice time to regroup. The bishop is heading towards a5. So Michael Adams played a5, and here Vincent took on b3, but it was unnecessary. Better is to castle. After castle, just play h6, clarify the situation, and after bishop takes f6, knight f6, rook of d1. Now the a5 pawn is a target. White does get the full control over the d5 square, but he's losing the a5 pawn after queen c5, knight d5, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, or bishop takes a5. We have won this pawn. If bishop b7, rook b8, white will have issues with the b2 pawn in the end. And here white actually has a pretty strong follow-up, knight h4. Despite being a pawn down, he has some compensation here. Knight's coming to f5. d5 square is still under his control. But here black can play it pretty simple. King to h7. I want to push g6. So knight f5 is now a forced follow-up. And here we play queen to c7. Knight d6 was threatened, and as the bishop is also hanging, and we just prepare for that. We go knight queen c7, knight d6. Now we have a very strong reply, bishop b4. White cannot take with the knight because of knight takes d5. Cannot take also with the bishop on b7 because we just move the rook, and the knight is then, or here to b8, sorry, knight is then hanging and the bishop is hanging as well. So the reason I said to b8 is because I believe rook a7 there is also knight b5 we have to take into account, but after rook b8 it appears as though we win a piece after all. So white has to just play knight c4 back. But now we play bishop c5, and we have improved our bishop tremendously, given back this weak pawn. And without the d6 pawn, the control over the d5 square is much less of an issue. The rook from d file also applies the pressure on that square. The bishop is controlling the e3 square, a very strong bishop. This is just a very comfortable position. Next, we want to play g6, king g7, and just have a very, very comfortable position without any issues. That is for the move bishop b3, where we go knight b7, yeah. And 10 bishop a2 is also possible. Now we play knight c6 immediately. Here also possible to start with h6, but knight c6 is okay. Bishop g5, not a problem here. If white castles, then we play knight b4, bishop b3, and now we go h6. Again, bishop e6, f6, always fine, unless there is any issue, and here there isn't. Bishop b3, h6, stop g5, bishop g5. I also mentioned that we can take on b3 and play queen h6 first, but okay, h6 is comfortable. a5 castle, and yeah, white tried rook a4. I mean, otherwise we always want to take and play queen a6. Rook a4 is hitting our knight. Now we can just take and knight c6 back. The reason we take is that if knight c6, white has knight d5 move, posing some problems. So we should take first, play knight c6. And here, position is essentially, it is unusual, but it is fine. The a5 and b3 pawns are not great. The rook on a4 also a little bit odd. What is important is that we have good control over the d5 square here. Knight on f3 and the bishop on c1 are not contributing to that. Our knight is protecting the square. Only one knight is attacking the d5 square. So yeah, good fine position. Balanced, complex position here. More critical is 11th bishop g5. Of course, since we postponed h6, it's important to see what we do here. And here we play very concrete. We go knight b4. Now, with white takes on f6, we have an intermezzo in knight takes a2. Very strong. Bishop e7, knight takes c3, of course, hitting the queen. And if white goes bishop b3 first, now we trade these bishops. And now it's very important. It's also an idea that we have seen, yeah, we did see that idea also in the 6 bishop e3, e5, knight f3 chapter, that this knight is trying to run away from the g5 bishop, because we don't want to allow the trade when there's only one defender left for the d5 square, which is a bit tricky here. Instead, we play knight to h5, and we want to keep the knight. Bishop e7 is not even possible because of knight f4 intermezzo, a very strong intermediate idea. And if white goes back with bishop e3, we have queen e6, hitting the b3 pawn as well. We preserve the knight that can always later on protect the square. And if white plays g3, guarding the f4 square, then we can trade bishops. And now if we trade with bishops, we have preserved this knight on f6, and we have very good control over the d5 square, and we have nothing to worry about in this position. So some subtle, unusual ideas. I liked it. I like to show different ways of playing these structures, and to show it's not the full, then as full as I can the spectrum of our different ideas and different attempts of fighting around that d5 square. That is for bishop c4. 8 bishop g5 is also a very principled move. After bishop e6, white takes on f6, takes on f6, and plays knight d5. And there is a similar idea in the bishop e2 system, very similar in fact. But here too, white wants to bring the bishop out to c4. And compared to that system, white has got this extra move a4 in. So yeah, very sensible. White is using the fact that he has postponed the development of his bishops to develop them to ideal squares. This is by the way, a very solid system for white. And I recommend here two different approaches. One is the main line, and also one line that is slightly more playful. And just to give you an extra option, I think definitely useful for this against this line to give two options just in case. So the main move is knight d7. We'll look at that momentarily, but first let's look at knight c6. This is an old idea I had. I never actually got to play it, but it's very, very interesting. Usually we want to fight for this d5 square with the knight. So traditionally black does it in the knight d7 b6 fashion, as we will see. But knight c6, knight e7 is also possible, and that's what we do here. Knight c6, white should play bishop c4 as well. Okay, you can start with c3 first. Then after rook c8, he has to anyway bring the bishop to c4. That's where the bishop belongs. So bishop c4 first. Let's say rook c8, and next we want actually knight e7, not even minding the doubled f pawns of knight f6 gf, or well, at least that's the idea. I mean, of course, especially in this position, it is not. It's not that it comes without any risk or without any responsibility, but there are some upsides to that. So this is this extra option I give. Very interesting. So let's first look at the options. Castle, of course, the main move, but also interesting is first of all knight e3. White is trying to regroup his pieces and dodge the knight e7 move. We castle. Now play knight d4, knight to the center, and if white plays knight d2, we have bishop g5, and if white takes on e6, we take with the f pawn. Again, if the knight moves, we have bishop g5, or after c3, we can take and play bishop g5. And yeah, here we have decent control over the d5 square. 12 c3 is also an attempt. Now after knight e7, white would like to... of course, white can again take on f6, but he plays c3 with the idea to drop the bishop on b3. He tries to play it very clean, not go for any complicated pawn structures, but try to maintain this same pawn structure. And now, as compared to castle, at the end of the line, the c2 pawn is not hanging. At the end of line, at the end of this line, knight d5, bishop d5, bishop d5, queen d5, the c2 pawn is not hanging. That's the point of c3. But c3 is a tempo that white spent instead of castling. So while this position, like if you look at the position itself, the pieces we have left and the pawn structure, it is extremely dangerous for black. If we imagine that white knight would be on d5, yeah, that would be a real positional disaster. By the way, we would only have the dark squared bishop, and white has a complete dominance of the d5 square. But that is first of all not the case. The knight is far off from that square, and secondly, white hasn't castled yet, and we are in time to eventually break free with d5 after first playing queen b6, hitting the b2 pawn. White has no better way of protecting it than with queen d2. And after castle, queen b6, also the point is actually to protect the b7 pawn, not only attack the b2 pawn. Castle, yeah, queen d2, castle, sorry. And now we're going for rook fd8, followed by rook c5 and d5. We break free. Even if here, if we imagine that white would have a rook on d5 instead of the knight, he would still have a dominant position. But we don't let him have that. We fight for this d5 square. So while black is fine in all of these lines, of course, you have to understand that we are running strategic risk, especially if we traded the wrong pieces. So we are fine, but only because of the concrete push with d5. But once we push d5, of course, we'll have the bishop working on both flanks, and we have no more weaknesses. So it's going to be totally fine. But you do have to play well. I mean, if let's say you play a move like h6 and waste enough time for white to bring the rook to d5, yeah, then you're going to suffer for a long time. And please don't blame me for the suffering. So that is for 12 c3. Now 12 castle is the main move. Now we play knight e7. That's the point. Also knight b4 is possible, by the way. But then white can take on f6, yeah, and that would be quite similar to knight d7, knight b6. The whole point of knight e7 is to try and unbalance the position. If you want to equalize it, we can do it with knight d7, knight b6, as we'll see. So here we're trying to create some unbalance, try to confuse white player who is trying to play it very solid and tries to go for his familiar pawn structures. Here main move is knight f6, but also let's see what happens after b3, because after knight d5, bishop d5, bishop d5, queen d5, rook c2, white has of course queen takes b7 as well. So it's not like he's losing the pawn. But here black has a strong move queen c8. This happened in Movsesian Bok. Bok is a Dutch player, so a good detective, good Sherlock Holmes in you might figure out how he was aware of this particular idea. But yeah, after queen c8, the endgame is very comfortable for black, because in this endgame our king is coming very quickly to e6. White is not in time to consolidate on the d5 square, and yeah, the knight is far away from the d5 square, and in some lines bishop gets rerouted via d8. Yeah, in this endgame, basically black is not in any danger whatsoever, especially thanks to the fact that the king is still in the center. And also the game worked out well for Bok. I think he was at some point he could even push for more, but he made a comfortable draw. Main move is knight takes f6. That's what we are looking forward to. Gf, bishop e6, fe6. Yeah, and this position is sorry, I skipped over here, but yeah, of course white has to take on e6. What else? Keeping the bishop is not ideal, as we still have great control over these squares, and our bishop is pretty good. Yeah, this position is basically the one we are going for, the one most likely to arise. A very complex position. When I was more naive, younger, I was even happier here for black. I really liked the strong pawn center. Now, with a little more years, a little more experience, I became a little bit also more skeptical of this position, because if we compare the king's safety, of course, white king is a lot more secure on g1. That said, I still like the potential in black's position. Well, for example, if we imagine an endgame, of course, immediately black is doing tremendous. So the king safety does play a role, but we have potential, for example, to bring the king to h8 after short castle, where it is reasonably safe. And once our pawns get rolling, there is definitely a scenario in which we take over the whole center. There's also a scenario in which we start initiative along the g file, though that's not that easy, because white will place the pawn on g3 if needed, or the knight on h4. It's not like you play rook g8 and you mate. That's not the case. It's not so simple, but yeah, basically hard to say. Computers are also assessing it as around balanced. They don't. They think it's very playable, and yeah, let's look at some example lines. For example, knight d2. The idea is to bring the queen to g4 after castle, so maybe we shouldn't castle yet. Queen d7, protecting the e6 pawn, intending maybe knight g6, c4, and now castle. And yeah, c4 is an attempt to control the d5 square, but still you can push for d5 or f5. In this system, black is constantly choosing between f5 or d5. Both usually are possible, and this also makes it slightly difficult that you have to make a decision. But yeah, both are interesting. The king eventually goes to h8 if need be. That's for knight d2. If 15 c3, we can castle, knight h4, bring the king to h8, and then again push f5 or d5. Yeah, complex position, definitely good to have as an option for sure. And I think if you are the better player, if you have a good day, there is definitely a potential here to outplay your opponent. A different situation is in 1097. It's a lot more simple. But here, white, of course, he gets his his familiar pawn structure, the pawn structure that he is usually aiming for, and there are less counter chances. But in terms of fighting for opening equality, we're definitely there. Knight d7, bishop c4 is what white plays. And now rook c8 is a good move to include, hitting the bishop for free. And here, white has a very big choice. And there are various ways of protecting the bishop, and also white can move it. Let's look at them one by one. So bishop a2, that's very rare. Now we play knight b6. And if white takes on b6 or f6, we get the same position as after 12, queen e2 or queen d3. So we have the same situation, but white have just lost a small tempo. So there's no much point in seeing them again. or I mean, well, not again. We'll see them basically later after 12 queen d2 or queen d3. There we also played knight b6. Then white is choosing between two captures. So after bishop a2, knight b6, yeah, the only idea is c3, independent idea, trying to keep that pawn structure, but that's very familiar with transposed position we already saw in the other line. Queen b6, queen d2, castle, castle, rook d8, and rook c5, as you remember. So that's for 10, 12, bishop a2. b3, bishop b3 is an interesting move that was played by Kamsky against Topalov. Back in that same very match, Kamsky played a4 in a few games there, so by this game Topalov was well prepared, and he essayed the queen a5 check. Very clever idea. Now if b4 he just returns, he provoked b4, a very interesting provocation, weakening a little bit these queenside squares. After bishop b3, black can play a5, and he gets that c5 square. It's a very unclear position, and it's never been played, I believe, but it's an interesting position. For example, castle, a takes b4, while he can play queen d2, trying to get the b4 pawn with the queen. He still has good control over the d5 square, but yeah, we have now a perfect outpost for the knight on c5, and I like the move bishop g4. Confusing whites, as this queen is distracted by the pawn. We'll double the f3 pawns, queen before bishop f3, gf. And after knight c5, white has also some dark square weaknesses, knight the c5 square, the f4 square. But he has a tremendous knight on d5, and position is roughly balanced. White can play queen b6 to trade queens, as the his king is a little bit in danger potentially. After takes, queen takes, bishop takes. Yeah, things compensate each other out. The d5 square for the c5 square, and these pawns are also, of course, not really very impressive. So Nicola endgame here. Kamsky in the game played queen d2, but the endgame was very good for black. Topalov took queen d2, knight d2, bishop g5. Kamsky played king d1, very original, trying to free his bishop, prepare for bishop d5, bishop d5, just in case. And yeah, but Topalov played h5 first, and later after h4 he played knight f6, offering a trade of pieces. And in the endgame, black is very comfortable, as white will lose control over the d5 square, and this bishop is very, very well placed on g5. So this is good endgame for black, important often with knight f6 to 5 for the d5 square eventually, as always. That's for b3. Queen d3, yeah, queen d3 or queen e2, that's the main question. So very similar, queen d3 play knight b6. White can take the knight or the bishop, so after knight b6, queen b6, bishop b6, f6. This is the one type of positions we have. It is around balanced after castle. Essentially, black has few ideas. He has a potential idea to push d5 at some point. He should be, of course, careful with it, not to push at the right moment when white forgets about his e4 square. And the other idea that black has in these positions is reroute the bishop to b6. We will see that in the queen e2 line. There, white has a slightly better version. Here, his b2 pawn is not easy to protect. He has the move c4 though, and that's quite clever. If we take now, our queen is trapped with rook fb1. We shouldn't fall for it. We play rook fd8. And next, we want to bring the queen to b4, and then some b5 or d5 break eventually will give us enough counterplay. We will see these positions with the queen on e2 a lot more in a lot more detail. That's there the queen is just better placed for this. Here knight f6 is possible. Queen f6, bishop b6, queen e6. This position is also possible with the queen on e2. Small nuances there. Here we get knight d7, knight c5 tempo. For example, castle, rook fd1, rook c6. Now this is a safe position. Well, relatively safe position for white, and yeah, that's why I also offered the option of knight c6, knight e7 to give a more double-edged struggle. But if black plays well, there's not much wrong should happen. We want to reroute the knight via d7 to c5. That's why we also play rook c6 and not rook fd8 to protect the pawn from the side, allow the knight maneuver. And after that, we at some point want to push for counterplay with f5 because we don't want to endlessly have the issue of the d5 square. c3, excuse me, knight d7. White has here two ways. He can try to reroute the knight to e3 via d2 or via e1. e1, c2, e3, or d2, f1, e3. In both cases, we'll have the same sorts of counterplay, knight c5 and f5. For example, knight e1, knight c5, queen e2, f5, ef. Now we can take with the rook, knight c2, rook f7, drop back in case of knight e3, which white anyway has to play, knight e3, now e4. And now we are going for knight d3, knight d5. I will show just so we don't blunder it to knight d3, rook d3. Pardon me, on the pin here, we play queen e5 first, and next we want to play knight d3, and if knight b4, defending from that, we will swing the rook over via c8 to f8. Black has small pawn weaknesses in d6 and e4, but with the strong counterplay along the f file and the strong knight, there is more than well, not more. There is enough counterplay for the for these somewhat weakened squares and like d5 and so on. So dynamic equality here. Same is after knight d2, 18, knight c5, queen e2, also f5, ef, queen f5 here, knight c4, and there are many different approaches here. I like the direct solution knight e6 that happened in a correspondence game, Starovsky and Nekhaev, 2014. Both players 2500 approximately. A good correspondence game. The idea is to bring knight to f4, and after knight takes d6, queen g6, and knight f4 is coming, queen d3 takes 6. And the point, yeah, queen d3 is essential. The knight f4 was kind of tricky already. The knight on d6 would be hanging, and the g2 pawn also. So also after queen e5, again, there's some knight f4 tricks. So white has to try to play it safe. And queen d3 does just that, but now we can go into the endgame, and there is a concrete idea after rook d8, rook d1. We have knight c5, and white's a4 pawn, which is, by the way, always slightly weak in these positions, is falling now. After rook d2, we take on a4. If white takes on b7, we can take on d2, and after rook d2, rook b6, we will come after the pawn. So the position is here equalized. Black had other options, of course, and he would have different ways of starting his counterplay. But this is pretty good. Now let's look at queen e2 and queen e2, knight b6. Yeah, let's look at knight b6, queen b6, bishop e6, fe structures. Very interesting structures. I played them with both colors and in different versions. Black has what seems to be a bad bishop on f6. Well, I mean, on f6 it's definitely bad. It's staring at these two pawns, so let's not kid ourselves. The bishop is bad. But it does have a potential via d8, b6. Once it reroutes to this diagonal, it's going to be a very strong bishop here, pressuring the f2 pawn. So there is hope there for the bishop. White should play c3, protect the b2 pawn. Castle, castle. Now there are many different, of course. I mean, it's not a forced position, so there are many different moves. But I'll just show two ideas. So queen c6, and the idea is to reroute the bishop via d8 to b6. Vichy Allen played against me knight e1. White has a lot of options. In terms of moves, you can make any move, so you cannot cover all the moves. But I will nonetheless demonstrate some ideas after knight e1. So in this particular position, I could just play d5, and this equalizes. I did not play it because of knight f3 back, I think. I thought it was very clever. Now if d, he will play knight d2, but I can play here queen c4, and the endgame is equal. Also, I could play queen c4 first. If knight d3, then d5. That also gives black excellent counterplay. I believe, yeah, rook e1. There is this idea, rook d8, put pressure on the d file, takes, knight e5, wins the pawn, but now after takes, queen to rook e2, d4. c4, rook d4, white has like too many weak pawns here, and the bishop is just super stable. Black has full equality here in the same game. So that's also possible, but I played bishop d8. It's instructive to see this anyway, because white can play, for example, I don't know, king h1 first, and then you are maybe not sure about queen c4 or d5, then you can play bishop d8. Or white can play rook fe1 when d5 is really not looking very attractive. And then again, you can play bishop d8. So yeah, I wanted to show it anyway. So knight e1, I played bishop d8. Against Vichy and knight d3, bishop b6, king h1. Vichy tried to get out of the pin and put pawn to f3, very sensible idea. Now I doubled on the f file, rook f6, f3, rook c f8. rook of d1, and here in one game against Vishanand, I didn't push g5, and I had one more game against him in a slightly different position, but very similar one to this one. There I did push g5, and in both games, yeah, I managed to, yeah, we made 2 draws in this structure, but I think with g5 it's a little bit more active for black, and we want to play rook g6 h5. We might at some point push g4 one day. And also the thing is that g5 is not too committal at this point. Our king is quite safe. Nobody's attacking it. So yeah, this position is dynamically, I believe, dynamically balanced. So yeah, this bishop d8 b6 maneuver is one thing. Well-timed d5 counterplay also the other. Very interesting position. Knight takes f6 also played a lot instead of knight b6. Here also queen f6, bishop c6, queen e6. We saw this with queen on d3, where we went for knight d7, knight c5 a lot. Now here we shouldn't do it. Of course, that would be a tempo down. There's no need to play the same plan in a different position. Let's look at the options here. If white castles, now we have queen c4. Now the queen not on d3, the d6 pawn is not hanging, and so queen c4 is pretty strong. The endgame is very comfortable for black, especially when white king has left the center. And our king stays in the center, so our king will be perfect in the endgame on e7. White is avoiding the endgame, queen e3, hits the knight on b6. Now we can reroute the knight, knight d3, c5. Sorry, knight d2, knight d7, sorry, c3. Defending the pawn, now knight c5, and with knight d2 we have queen d3. Also we hit the e4 pawn. Rook e1, now castle, knight d2, queen d3. Yeah, the endgame is also very fine. Here we will play rook of d8, d5 next. White somehow is a bit clumsy and gave us too much counterplay with these active pieces. This is fine. That's why castle is handled by queen c4. Bishop played a5 against Grishuk once in the Blitz game. He just made a move. I don't think it was very deep preparation. Knight d7, c3. Here Grishuk went for queen c4, but then Vishy managed to outplay him with knight d2. He traded queens, and then the king was very well located in the center. So I proposed to just castle, and just play this position with knight f6. And the a5 pawn is always a target after rook c5, so white cannot so easily bring this rook into the game. And also long term, there is always this d5 idea. And in general, with knight on f6, we have good control over the d5 square. So white cannot quite stabilize his position here, as he has to watch out for this d5 and the a5 pawn all the time. So this is pretty fine for black. 15b3 is also an idea, stopping queen c4, but this weakens the c3 square quite a bit. And now after castle, we can play rook c3. We can also reroute the knight immediately, but I like this using the weak squares. Rook c3, rook f1, rook f8. White can defend the c2 pawn with knight e1, but the knight on e1 does a pretty defensive job, and it's not all too impressive. After knight d7, rerouting the knight towards c5 or f6, black's position seems very fine. White has a nice pawn structure, but his pieces are quite passive, and there is very little that can go wrong for black. It's hard to imagine that the d5 square or the weakness of the d6 pawn is ever going to be a factor here, with us having such comfortable piece placement. I think that was that. For the a4 e5 line, we saw knight b3, knight d2 were not too big. Knight f3, bishop e7. We saw bishop c4, which was just the standard position after bishop e6, and bishop g5 here after bishop e6 takes knight d5. We saw two options. It's an interesting idea to allow this unusual pawn center and the simple theoretical knight d7, rook c8, knight d6 setup. I think that concludes 6 move a4. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next chapter.